Hello, we're back. It's Monday afternoon, 5:30, and I'm here for another week, another story, another bit of exciting entertainment, hopefully, for you all. So, we've been doing this for a long time now, many, many weeks. We've almost lost count. Boris Johnson gave his message yesterday, which people have either been like, "What are you talking about?" or they've been like, "Oh, okay." But anyway, never mind. We're not going to think about that. We're here for some simple entertainment to lose ourselves in fantasy because it's fun. And I enjoy reading these live, so I hope you guys are enjoying them as well. I know my friend Peter is, because he has showed up every day. So I was going to put these on YouTube, but I need to have 1,000 subscribers on YouTube to be able to do live videos on my phone. So that ain't going to happen for a while. However, if you guys do want to subscribe on YouTube, feel free. Do please share these videos. I know I ask you a lot, but there's a reason for that. It does make a difference. So yeah, without further ado, I'm going to introduce to you the story for the next 2 weeks. I'm going to read 2 chapters a day for 2 weeks. And here it is. It's a sequel to the story that I read to you guys 3 weeks ago. The sequel to Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. It is Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator. Yeah. Although in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, it was actually called the lift. But it's elevator now, apparently. He likes his Americanisms, does Roald Dahl. Yeah. Anyway, yes, so this was written after Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. It carries on from straight after where I left off. So if you want refreshing, go back and listen to it. Basically, Mr. Wonka's just gone plonk into their house in their lift and said, "Come and live with me in my factory." And they say, "Yay!" So, let's jump in, shall we? So, Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator. Written by Roald Dahl and read for you guys by me. Chapter 1. Mr. Wonka goes too far. The last time we saw Charlie, he was riding high above his hometown in the great glass lift. Only a short while before, Mr. Wonka had told them that the whole gigantic, fabulous chocolate factory was his. And now our small friend was returning in triumph with his entire family to take over. The passengers in the lift, just to remind you, were Charlie Bucket, our hero, Mr. Willy Wonka, the chocolate maker extraordinaire, Mr. and Mrs. Bucket, Charlie's father and mother, Grandpa Joe and Grandpa Josephine, Mr. Bucket's father and mother, Grandpa George and Grandma Georgina, Mrs. Bucket's father and mother. So Grandma Joe, Grandma Josephine, Grandma Georgina and Grandpa George were still in bed, the bed having been pushed on board just before takeoff. Pretty big lift. Grandpa Joe, as you remember, had got out of bed to go around the chocolate factory with Charlie. So he's up on his feet. The great glass lift was 1,000 feet up and cruising nicely. The sky was a brilliant blue. Everybody on board was wildly excited at the thought of going to live in the famous chocolate factory. Grandpa Joe was singing. Charlie was jumping up and down. There we go. Grandpa Joe singing, "Charlie, doinky, doinky, doink." Mr. and Mrs. Bucket were smiling for the first time in years. Where are they? Oh, there they are. There they are, smiling. And the 3 old ones in the bed were grinning at one another with pink, toothless gums. Grandma Josephine. What in the world keeps this crazy thing up in the air?" croaked Grandma Josephine. "Madam," said Mr. Wonka, "it is not a lift any longer. Lifts only go up and down inside buildings. But now that it has taken us up into the sky, it has become an elevator. It is the great glass elevator." "And what keeps it up?" said Grandma Josephine. "Skyhooks," said Mr. Wonka. "You amaze me," said Grandma Josephine. "Dear lady," said Mr. Wonka, "you are new to the scene. When you have been in this a little while longer, nothing will amaze you." Here we go. There he is talking to Josephine. "These skyhooks," said Grandma Josephine. "I assume one end is hooked onto this contraption we're riding in, right?" "Right," said Mr. Wonka. "What's the other end hooked to?" said Grandma Josephine. "Every day," said Mr. Wonka, "I get deafer and deafer. Remind me, please, to call up my ear doctor the moment we get back." "Charlie," said Grandma Josephine, "I don't think I trust this gentleman very much."
"Nor do I,"
said Grandma Georgina.
He footles around.
Charlie leaned over the bed and whispered to the old woman. Please, he said, don't spoil everything. Mr. Wonka is a fantastic man. Fantastic man. He's my friend. I love him.
Charlie's right,
whispered Grandpa Joe, joining the group.
Now, you be quiet, Josie, and don't make trouble.
We must hurry, said Mr. Wonka. We have so much time and so little to do. No, wait. Cross that out. Reverse it. Thank you. Now, back to the factory. He clapped, clapping his hands once and springing 2 feet into the air with 2 feet. Back we fly to the factory. But we must go up before we can come down. We must go higher and higher. What did I tell you? Said Grandma Josephine. The man's cracked.
Be quiet, Josie,
said Grandpa Joe.
Mr. Wonka knows exactly what he's doing. He's cracked as a crab,
said Grandma Georgina. We must go higher, said Mr. Wonka. We must go tremendously high. Hold on to your stomach. He pressed a brown button. The elevator shuddered, and then with a fearful whooshing noise, it shot vertically upward like a rocket. Everybody clutched hold of everybody else, and as the great machine gathered speed, the rushing whooshing sound of the wind outside grew louder and shriller until it became a piercing shriek, and you had to yell to make yourself heard. Stop! Yelled Grandma Josephine. Joe, make him stop, won't you? I want to get off.
Save us!
Yelled Grandma Georgina. Go down! Yelled Grandpa George. No, no! Mr. Wonka yelled back. We've got to go up! But why? They all shouted at once. Why up and not down? Because the higher we are when we start coming down, the faster we'll all be going when we hit, said Mr. Wonka. We've got to be going at an absolutely sizzling speed when we hit. When we hit what? They cried. The factory, of course, answered Mr. Wonka. You must be whackers, said Grandma Josephine. We'll all be pulpified.
We'll be scrambled like eggs,
said Grandma Georgina. That, said Mr. Wonka, is a chance we shall have to take. You're joking, said Grandma Josephine. Tell us you're joking. Madam, said Mr. Wonka, I never joke.
Oh, my dears,
cried Grandma Georgina.
We'll be lixivated, every one of us. Lixivated,
that's a new word. More than likely, said Mr. Wonka. Grandma Josephine screamed and disappeared under the bedclothes. Grandma Georgina clutched Grandpa George so tight he changed shape. Mr. and Mrs. Bucket stood hugging each other, speechless with fright. Only Charlie and Grandpa Joe kept moderately cool. They'd travelled a long way with Mr. Wonka, and they'd grown accustomed to surprises. But as the great elevator continued to streak upwards, further and further away from the earth, even Charlie began to feel a trifle nervous. Mr. Wonka, he yelled above the noise. What I don't understand is why we've got to come down at such a terrific speed. My dear boy, Mr. Wonka answered, if we don't come back down at a terrific speed, we'll never burst our way in through the roof of the factory. It's not easy to punch a hole in a roof as strong as that. But there's a hole in it already, said Charlie. We made it when we came out. Then we shall make another, said Mr. Wonka. 2 holes are better than 1. Any mouse will tell you that. Higher and higher rushed the great glass elevator, until soon they could see the countries and oceans of the earth spread out below them like a map. It was all very beautiful. But when you're standing on a glass floor looking down, it gives you a nasty feeling. Even Charlie was beginning to feel frightened now. He hung on tightly to Grandpa Joe's hand and looked up anxiously into the old man's face. I'm scared, Grandpa, he said. Grandpa Joe put an arm around Charlie's shoulders and held him close.
So am I, Charlie. Oh.
Picture. There's the elevator. And there's the earth.
So am I, Charlie. So am I.
Mr. Wonka, Charlie shouted. Don't you think this is high enough? Very nearly, Mr. Wonka answered. But not quite. Don't talk to me now, please. Don't disturb me. I must watch things very carefully at this stage. Split-second timing, my boy. Split-second. That's what it's got to be. You see this green button? I must press it at exactly the right instant. If I'm just half a second late, then we'll go too high.
What happens if we go too high?
asked Grandpa Joe. Do please stop talking and let me concentrate, Mr. Wonka said. At that precise moment, Grandma Josephine poked her head out from under the sheets and peered over the edge of the bed. Oh! Through the glass floor, she saw the entire continent of North America nearly 200 miles below and looking no bigger than a bar of chocolate.
Someone's got to stop this maniac!
She screeched, and she shot out a wrinkled old hand and grabbed Mr. Wonka by the coat tails and yanked him backwards onto the bed. No, no, cried Mr. Wonka, struggling to free himself. Let me go, I have things to see to. Don't disturb the pilot.
You madman!
Shrieked Grandma Josephine, shaking Mr. Wonka so fast his head became a blur. Just got to check I'm doing the right voice. Yes. His head became a blur. You get us back home this instant. Let me go, cried Mr. Wonka. I've got to press that button or we'll get too high. Let me go. Let me go. But Grandma Josephine, Grandma, hung on.
Charlie?
Well, that was Mr. Wonka. Charlie, shouted Mr. Wonka. Press the button, the green one. Quick, quick, quick. Charlie leaped across the elevator and banged his thumb down on the green button. But as he did so, the elevator gave a mighty groan and rolled over onto its side, and the rushing whooshing noise stopped altogether. There was an eerie silence. Too late, cried Mr. Wonka. Oh, my goodness me, we're cooked. As he spoke, the bed with the three old ones in it, and Mr. Wonka on top, lifted gently off the floor and hung suspended in midair. Charlie and Grandma Joe and Mr. and Mrs. Bucket also floated upwards, so that in a twink, the entire company, as well as the bed, were floating around like balloons inside the great glass elevator. Now look what you've done, said Mr. Wonka, floating about. What happened? Grandma Josephine called out. She had floated clear of the bed and was hovering near the ceiling in her nightshirt. Did we go too far? Charlie asked. Too far? Cried Mr. Wonka. Of course we went too far. You know where we've gone, my friends. We've gone into orbit. They gasped. They gaped. They stared. They were too flabbergasted to speak. We are now rushing around the Earth at 17,000 miles an hour, Mr. Wonka said. How does that grab you?
I'm choking,
Gasped Grandma Georgina. Say that a few times. Gasped Grandma Georgina.
I can't breathe.
Of course you can't, said Mr. Wonka. There's no air up here. He sort of swam across under the ceiling to a button marked oxygen. He pressed it. You'll be all right now, he said. Breathe away. This is the queerest feeling, Charlie said, swimming about. I feel like a bubble.
It's great,
said Grandpa Joe.
It feels as though I don't weigh anything at all.
You don't, said Mr. Wonka. None of us weighs anything, not even 1 ounce.
What piffle,
said Grandma Georgina.
I weigh 137 pounds exactly.
Not now you don't, said Mr. Wonka. You are completely weightless. The three old ones, Grandpa George, Grandma Georgina, and Grandma Josephine, were trying frantically to get back into bed, but without success. The bed was floating about in midair. They, of course, were also floating, and every time they got above the bed and tried to lie down, they simply floated up out of it. Charlie and Grandpa Joe were hooting with laughter. What's so funny? Said Grandma Josephine. We've got you up and out of bed at last, said Grandpa Joe. Shut up and help us back, snapped Grandma Josephine. Forget it, said Mr. Wonka. You'll never stay down. Just keep floating around and be happy.
The man's a madman,
cried Grandma Georgina.
Watch out, I say, or he'll lixivate us, the lot of us.
Lixivate. Homework, find out what lixivate means. I'll ask Alexa later. Chapter number 2. Space Hotel, USA. Mr. Wonka's great glass elevator was not the only thing orbiting the Earth at that particular time. 2 days before, the United States of America had successfully launched its first space hotel, a gigantic sausage-shaped capsule no less than 1,000 feet long. It was called Space Hotel USA, and it was the marvel of the space age. It had inside it a tennis court, a swimming pool, a gymnasium, a children's playroom, and 500 luxury bedrooms, each with a private bath. It was fully air-conditioned. It was also equipped with a gravity-making machine so that you didn't float about inside of it. You walked normally. This extraordinary object was now speeding round and round the earth at a height of 240 miles. Guests were to be taken up and down by a taxi service of small capsules blasting off from Cape Kennedy every hour on the hour, Mondays to Fridays. But as yet, there was nobody on board at all, not even an astronaut. The reason for this was that no one had really believed such an enormous thing would ever get up off the ground without blowing up. But the launching had been a great success, and now that the Space Hotel was safely in orbit, there was a tremendous hustle and bustle to send up the first guests. It was rumoured that the President of the United States himself was going to be among the first to stay in the hotel. And of course, there was a mad rush by all sorts of other people across the world to book rooms. Several kings and queens had cabled to the White House in Washington for reservations, and a Texas millionaire called Orson Cart, who was about to marry a Hollywood starlet called Helen Highwater, was offering $100,000 a day for the honeymoon suite. But you cannot send guests to a hotel unless there are lots of people there to look after them, and that explains why there was yet another interesting object orbiting the Earth at that moment. This was the large transporter capsule containing the entire staff for Space Hotel USA. There were managers, assistant managers, desk clerks, waitresses, bellboys, chambermaids, pastry chefs, and hall porters. The capsule they were travelling in was manned by the three famous astronauts, Shuckworth, Shanks, and Showler, all of them handsome, clever, and brave. "In exactly 1 hour," said Shuckworth, speaking to the passengers over the loudspeaker, "we shall link up with Space Hotel USA. Your happy home for the next 10 years. Siren. It's gone. "And any moment now, if you look straight ahead, you should catch your first glimpse of this magnificent spaceship. Aha! I see something there. That must be it. Now look, folks, there's definitely something up ahead there. Yep. You see it? Shuckworth, Shanks, and Showler, as well as the managers, assistants, managers, desk clerks, waitresses, bellboys, chambermaids, pastry chefs, and hall porters, all stared excitedly through the windows. Shuckworth fired a couple of small rockets to make the capsule go faster, and they began to catch up very quickly. "Hey!" yelled Showler. "That isn't our space hotel." "Holy rats!" cried Shanks. "What in the name of Nebuchadnezzar is that?" "Quick, give me the telescope!" yelled Shuckworth. With one hand he focused the telescope, and with the other he flipped the switch, connecting him to ground control. "Hello, Houston!" he cried into the mic. "There's something crazy going on up here. There's a thing orbiting ahead of us, and it's not like any spaceship I've ever seen, that's for sure." "Describe it at once," ordered ground control in Houston. It's all made of glass, and it's a kind of a square shape, and it's got lots of people inside of it. They're floating around like fish in a tank." "How many astronauts on board?" "None," said Shuckworth. "They can't possibly be astronauts." "What makes you say that?" "Because at least 3 of them are in nightshirts." "Don't be a fool, Shuckworth," snapped ground control. "Pull yourself together, man. This is serious." "I swear it," cried poor Shuckworth. "There's 3 of them in nightshirts. 2 old women and 1 old man. I can see them clearly. I can even see their faces. Japers, they're older than Moses. They're about 90 years old." "You've gone mad, Shuckworth!" shouted ground control. "You're fired! Give me Shanks!" "Shanks speaking," said Shanks. "Now listen here, Houston. There's these 3 old birds in nightshirts floating around in this crazy glass box, and there's a funny little guy with a pointed beard wearing a black top hat and a plum-colored velvet tailcoat and bottle green trousers." "Stop!" screamed ground control. "That's not all," said Shanks. "There's also a little boy about 10 years old." "That's no boy, you idiot!" shouted ground control. "That's an astronaut in disguise. It's a midget astronaut dressed up as a little boy. Those old people are astronauts too. They're all in disguise." "But who are they?" cried Shanks. "How the heck would I know?" said ground control. "Are they heading for our space hotel?" "Oh, that's exactly where they are heading," cried Shanks. "I can see the space hotel now, about a mile ahead." "They're going to blow it up!" yelled ground control. "This is desperate! This is..." Suddenly his voice was cut off, and Shanks heard another quite different voice in his earphones. It was deep and rasping. Oh wait, I need to find out who it is. Ah yes, okay.
I'll take charge of this,
said the deep rasping voice.
Are you there, Shanks?
Of course I'm here, said Shanks. But how dare you butt in? You keep your big nose out of this. Who are you anyway?
This is the President of the United States,
said the voice. And this is the Wizard of Oz, said Shanks. Who are you kidding?
Cut the piffle, Shanks,
snapped the President.
This is a national emergency.
Good grief, said Shanks, turning to Shuckworth and Showler. It really is the President. It's President Gilligrass himself. Well, hello there, Mr. President, sir. How are you today? Here we go.
How many people are there in the great glass capsule?
Rasped the President. 8, said Shanks. All floating.
Floating?
We're outside the pull of gravity up here, Mr. President. Everything floats. We'd be floating ourselves if we weren't strapped down. Didn't you know that?
Of course I knew it, said the President. What else can you tell me about the great glass capsule?
There's a bed in it, said Shanks. A big double bed, and that's floating too.
A bed?
Barked the President.
Who ever heard of a bed in a spacecraft?
I swear it's a bed, said Shanks.
You must be loopy, Shanks,
declared the President.
You're dotty as a donut. Let me talk to Showler. Showler here, Mr. President, said Showler,
taking the mic from Shanks.
It is a great honor to talk to you, Mr. President, sir. Oh, shut up,
said Mr. President. I'm reading with a lisp now.
Just tell me what you see.
It's a bed, all right, Mr. President. I can see it through my telescope. It's got sheets and blankets and a mattress.
That's not a bed, you driveling thickwit,
yelled the President.
Can't you understand it's a trick? It's a bomb. It's a bomb disguised as a bed. They're going to blow up our magnificent space hotel.
Who's they, Mr. President, sir? Said Showler.
Don't talk to me so much and let me think,
said the President. There were a few moments of silence. Showler waited tensely. So did Shanks and Shuckworth. So did the managers and, here we go, assistant managers and the desk clerks and the waitresses and the bellboys and the chambermaids and the pastry chefs and the hall porters. And down in the huge control room at Houston, 100 controllers sat motionless in front of their dials and monitors, waiting to see what orders the President would give next to the astronauts.
I just thought of something, said the President. Don't you have a television camera up there on the front of your spacecraft, Showler?
Sure do, Mr. President.
Then switch it on, you nit, and let us all down here get a look at the object.
I never thought of that, said Showler. No wonder you're the President. Here goes. He's lisping now. Here goes. This is going to be difficult. Never mind. It'll be fun. He reached out and switched on the TV camera in the nose of the spacecraft, and at that moment, 500 million people all over the world who'd been listening in on their radios rushed to their television sets. On their screens, they saw exactly what Shuckworth and Shanks and Showler were seeing, a weird glass box in splendid orbit around the Earth. And inside the box, seen not too clearly, but seen nonetheless, were 7 grown-ups and 1 small boy and a big double bed, all floating. 3 of the grown-ups were bare-legged and wearing nightshirts, and far off in the distance, beyond the glass box, the TV watchers could see the enormous, glistening, silvery shape of Space Hotel USA. But it was the sinister glass box itself that everybody was staring at, and the cargo of sinister creatures inside it. 8 astronauts, so tough and strong, they didn't even bother to wear spacesuits. Who were these people, and where did they come from? And what in heaven's name was the big, evil-looking thing disguised as a double bed? The President had said it was a bomb, and he was probably right. But what were they going to do with it? All across America and Canada and Russia and Japan and India and China and Africa and England and France and Germany and everywhere else in the world, a kind of panic began to take hold of the television watchers.
Keep well clear of them, Showler,
ordered the President over the radio link. Sure will, Mr. President, Showler answered. I sure will.
Well, that's done. Think of it.
That's the end of the chapter. Cool, there's long chapters, aren't they? Yes, 2 a day for the next 9 days. Well, the weekend off. Yes. On the weekend, I lie down and rest after the hard work of making all those accents and trying not to lisp while I read. No, I love it. And I hope you guys love it as well. I'm seeing some likes poking out on the side, which is fun. I'm going to wave at people. Waving! Ha! Right, yeah. That's all for today. Do come back tomorrow at 5:30 to find out what happens next. Is it a bomb? We know it's not, but the world doesn't. Yeah. And please, if you've enjoyed yourselves, please do share this because, you know, it means I do my job a little bit better because more people can hear my stories, right? Yeah. Awesome. See you guys tomorrow, 5:30. Have a lovely night. Goodbye.